Picture this. It's 1897. The gas lamps flicker along Fifth Avenue in New York City. Horse-drawn carriages clatter past brownstones where America's wealthiest families sleep on silk sheets imported from Paris. But tonight, something different is happening. Something that will change luxury hospitality forever. A 17-story behemoth rises against the Manhattan skyline. Its 1,000 rooms glow with electric light, a technology so new that most Americans have never seen it. Crystal chandeliers illuminate ballrooms where champagne flows like water. Orchestras play for guests dripping in diamonds worth more than entire city blocks. This is the Waldorf Astoria, the largest, most luxurious hotel the world has ever seen. But behind those gilded walls lies a story far darker than the society pages ever printed. A story of bitter family hatred, of unimaginable wealth built on the backs of the desperate, of scandals hushed up with stacks of cash, of a tragedy so enormous that it would claim the life of the very man who built half of this palace. This is the story they don't want you to know about America's most famous hotel. Welcome to the dark history of the Waldorf Astoria. To understand the Waldorf Astoria, you first need to understand one simple truth. This hotel was built on spite. Pure, concentrated, aristocratic spite. The Astor family was, without exaggeration, one of the wealthiest dynasties in American history. Their fortune began with John Jacob Astor, a German immigrant who arrived in New York in 1784 with almost nothing. Through a combination of ruthless business tactics, fur trading, and real estate speculation, he became America's first multimillionaire. When he died in 1848, John Jacob Astor was worth approximately $20 million. In today's money, that's roughly equivalent to $150 billion. Let that sink in for a moment. This man, born in a butcher's shop in Germany, died owning vast swaths of Manhattan real estate. But here's where the story gets interesting and dark. The Astor fortune passed down through generations, eventually splitting between two branches of the family. And these two branches, they absolutely despised each other. On one side, you had William Waldorf Astor. Born in 1848, William was raised with every privilege imaginable. Private tutors, European grand tour, a massive mansion on Fifth Avenue at 33rd Street. He was cultured, refined, and possessed what his contemporaries called a continental sensibility. He also had an ego the size of the fortune he inherited. William believed with absolute conviction that he was the rightful head of American society. His father had been the eldest son, making William the direct heir to the Astor legacy. In his mind, everyone should defer to him. Everyone should recognize his superiority. There was just one problem. Living right next door, literally sharing a wall with William's mansion, was his Aunt Caroline. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor. And Caroline had absolutely no intention of deferring to anyone. Caroline, or Mrs. Astor, as she insisted on being called, was the self-appointed queen of New York high society. She had invented the 400, an exclusive list of the only people in New York who truly mattered. If you weren't on Mrs. Astor's list, you didn't exist. She threw legendary balls where the cream of American aristocracy gathered to see and be seen. Her ballroom could hold exactly 400 guests, hence the name. And she made it perfectly clear that William Waldorf Astor was not the head of the family. She was. The two of them lived in adjoining mansions, separated by a single wall. They could practically hear each other breathing, and they conducted an elaborate social warfare that would have made European royalty blush. Mrs. Astor threw parties specifically to exclude William. William responded by cutting down trees in his garden that Mrs. Astor enjoyed looking at. Mrs. Astor had her servants spread gossip about William's supposedly strange European habits. William began telling people that American society was crude and provincial. It was petty, it was vicious, it was absolutely delicious. But William Waldorf Astor was about to make a move that would shock all of New York society. A move that would humiliate his aunt in the most public way imaginable. He was going to tear down his mansion and build a hotel. In 1890, William Waldorf Astor made an announcement that sent shockwaves through Fifth Avenue. He was leaving America. He was done with what he called this crude country. He was moving to England permanently. He would seek British citizenship and never return to the nation that had made his family obscenely wealthy. But before he left, he had one final act of revenge planned. He would demolish his family mansion, the mansion that shared a wall with his hated Aunt Caroline, and in its place he would build a massive hotel. A hotel that would tower over Mrs. Astor's home. A hotel that would bring noise and traffic and common tourists right to her doorstep. Mrs. Astor, after all, considered hotels to be establishments for transients, unsuitable neighbors for proper society, and now she would be living next to the biggest one in America. It was a masterstroke of social warfare. In 1893, the Waldorf Hotel opened its doors. 13 stories tall, over 400 rooms, decorated with enough gilt and marble to make Louis XIV jealous. William had hired the finest architects and decorators money could buy. No expense was spared. But here's what made the Waldorf truly revolutionary. William Waldorf Astor didn't just want to build a fancy hotel. He wanted to create an experience that would redefine luxury itself. Before the Waldorf, even the finest American hotels were essentially grand boarding houses. Guests ate communal meals at set times. The emphasis was on functionality, not indulgence. Hotels were places you stayed because you had to, not because you wanted to. The Waldorf changed everything. For the first time, guests could order room service at any hour. The hotel employed hundreds of staff members trained to anticipate every possible need. The restaurant offered a la carte dining, revolutionary for the time, with menus featuring delicacies from around the world. The Waldorf salad, invented in these very kitchens, would become an American classic. Electric lights blazed in every room. Telephones connected guests to the front desk. Private bathrooms, still a luxury in most homes, were standard in the finest suites. And then there was the public space. The Waldorf's lobby became known as Peacock Alley, a nickname that captured its essential function. This wasn't just a place to check in. It was a promenade where the wealthy came to see and be seen. Socialites would stroll through in their finest gowns, knowing that newspaper reporters lurked in every corner, ready to document their appearances for the society pages. The hotel became the place to be, the ultimate status symbol. If you could afford to stay at the Waldorf, or better yet, maintain a permanent residence there, you had truly arrived. But while society swooned over the Waldorf's magnificence, a darker reality existed just beneath the surface. Let's talk about what it actually took to run the largest luxury hotel in America. Behind every pristine white tablecloth, every perfectly fluffed pillow, every spotless marble floor, there were workers. Hundreds upon hundreds of workers. And their lives bore no resemblance to the gilded world they served. The Waldorf employed over 1,000 staff members at its peak. Chambermaids, bellhops, kitchen workers, laundresses, maintenance men, security guards, an army of invisible labor keeping the machinery of luxury running smoothly. These workers typically earned between $2 and $4 per week. That's for working 12 to 16-hour shifts, often 7 days a week. There was no overtime pay, no sick leave, no job security. If you complained, you were fired and replaced within the hour. The contrast was almost obscene in its extremity. In the same building where millionaires casually dropped thousands of dollars on champagne dinners, workers struggled to afford basic necessities. Many employees couldn't afford to live in Manhattan at all. They commuted from tenements in the outer boroughs, spending precious hours and pennies on transportation just to reach their place of servitude. And the working conditions, brutal. Kitchen staff worked in sweltering heat, surrounded by open flames and boiling liquids. Burns and cuts were routine hazards, and there was no workers' compensation if you were injured. Chambermaids were expected to clean dozens of rooms per shift, making beds, scrubbing bathrooms, and hauling heavy linens up and down stairs. Many developed chronic back problems and respiratory issues from the cleaning chemicals they used. The hotel's basement contained an elaborate infrastructure that guests never saw. Massive laundries, where women stood for hours over steaming tubs, industrial kitchens, where the temperature regularly exceeded 100 degrees, storage rooms filled with the overflow of the wealthy world above. This was the Gilded Age in microcosm. The very term Gilded Age comes from a Mark Twain novel, and it's no coincidence. Gilded means covered with a thin layer of gold, beautiful on the surface, but hiding something far less precious underneath. The Waldorf was gilded in every sense. Its beauty depended on exploitation. Its luxury was subsidized by poverty. Every comfort enjoyed by the wealthy was enabled by the discomfort of the poor. And it wasn't just the workers who suffered. Meanwhile, back on Fifth Avenue, Mrs. Astor was not taking her nephew's insult lying down. The Waldorf Hotel had indeed brought chaos to her doorstep. Carriages clogged the street. Tourists gawked at her mansion. The noise was intolerable. Her social position, the very foundation of her identity, seemed threatened. But Mrs. Astor had an ace up her silk sleeve. Her son, John Jacob Astor IV. John Jacob Astor IV was everything his cousin William was not. Where William was aloof and European, John was charming and thoroughly American. Where William collected art and antiquities, John tinkered with inventions. He held patents for several devices, including a bicycle brake and a machine to produce gas. He wrote a science fiction novel. He served in the military. He was also, crucially, incredibly competitive. In 1895, Mrs. Astor finally admitted defeat and moved uptown to a new mansion at 65th Street, far from the noise and bustle her nephew had inflicted upon her. Her former mansion was demolished. And in its place, John Jacob Astor IV built a hotel. Not just any hotel, a bigger hotel. The Astoria Hotel rose 17 stories, 4 stories taller than its rival, the Waldorf. It had over 500 rooms. Its decorations were even more extravagant, its technology even more cutting-edge. The message was clear. Whatever William could do, John could do better. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. The two hotels shared a wall. Literally shared a wall, just as the mansions before them had. And someone, possibly one of the architects, possibly a business manager looking at the bottom line, suggested something revolutionary. What if, instead of competing, the two hotels merged? The negotiations were delicate. The family hatred was real. But eventually, greed triumphed over spite. In 1897, a corridor was built connecting the Waldorf and the Astoria. The hyphen in Waldorf Astoria was born, representing, according to legend, the corridor between the two buildings. The combined Waldorf Astoria was now the largest hotel in the world, 1,000 rooms, 65,000 square feet of public space, a staff of over 1,500, annual revenues in the millions. It was a triumph of capitalism, of American excess, of the Gilded Age spirit. It was also, in its own way, a monument to dysfunction. The family that couldn't stand to live next to each other had instead built an empire together while barely speaking. The Waldorf Astoria wasn't just a hotel. It was a world unto itself, and like any world, it had its dark corners. The hotel's discretion was legendary. What happened at the Waldorf stayed at the Waldorf, for a price. Management understood that their wealthy clientele required privacy for activities that might not bear public scrutiny. Affairs were conducted in luxurious suites. Business deals of questionable legality were negotiated in private dining rooms. Gambling occurred in back rooms despite being technically illegal. The hotel employed an informal network of fixers who could make problems disappear. Drunk and disorderly guests were quietly escorted to their rooms rather than handed over to police. Scandals were hushed up with generous payments to the right people. The society reporters who frequented Peacock Alley knew exactly what they could and couldn't print, and the consequences of crossing that line. One of the more persistent rumors involved secret tunnels connecting the Waldorf Astoria to nearby buildings. While the full extent of these passages remains disputed, it's documented that underground routes existed that allowed VIP guests to come and go without being seen. Politicians, business tycoons, and celebrities used these passages to avoid reporters and conduct business they preferred to keep private. The hotel was also, paradoxically, both a center of high society and a place where social rules could be bent. Women who would never dream of entering a restaurant unchaperoned could dine alone at the Waldorf. The rules were different here. Money bought not just luxury, but a kind of freedom, freedom from the social constraints that governed ordinary life. This created its own form of darkness. The Waldorf became a place where powerful men could act on their worst impulses, confident that wealth would shield them from consequences. Stories of exploitation and abuse circulated in whispers, never quite making it to print. The victims, often young women from poor backgrounds working as servants or entertainers, had no recourse against men who could buy silence as easily as they bought champagne. And now we come to the darkest chapter in the Waldorf Astoria's early history, a chapter that would claim the life of one of its founders. John Jacob Astor IV, the man who built the Astoria, the man who helped create the merged hotel empire, was, by 1912, one of the richest people on Earth. His fortune was estimated at over $100 million, equivalent to several billion today. He was also embroiled in scandal. In 1909, John divorced his wife of 18 years, Ava. Divorce was still deeply stigmatized in this era, and the Astor divorce was national news. But that wasn't the scandal. The scandal was what came next. In 1911, at the age of 47, John Jacob Astor IV married Madeline Force. She was 18 years old. The age gap was considered shocking even by the standards of the time. Polite society turned against Astor. Churches refused to perform the wedding. Newspapers ran sensational coverage, suggesting that Astor had essentially purchased his teenage bride with his vast fortune. To escape the judgment and gossip, John and Madeline embarked on an extended honeymoon in Europe and Egypt. Madeline became pregnant, and in April 1912, the couple decided to return to America for the birth of their child. They booked passage on a new ocean liner making its maiden voyage, a ship that was being called unsinkable. The RMS Titanic. You know how this story ends. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. As the ship began to sink, the order went out, women and children first. John Jacob Astor IV helped his young, pregnant wife into a lifeboat. According to witnesses, he asked if he might accompany her, given her delicate condition. He was refused. Politely but firmly, he was told that no men would be allowed in the boats until all women and children were safe. John Jacob Astor IV stepped back from the lifeboat. He reportedly lit a cigarette. Some witnesses claim his last words were asking the number of the lifeboat his wife was in so he could find her later. He never did find her. He died in the sinking, one of over 1,500 people who perished that night. His body was recovered about a week later, identified by the initials sewn into his jacket. The man who had built half of the Waldorf Astoria, who had thumbed his nose at his cousin by constructing an even grander hotel, who had scandalized society by marrying a teenager, was gone at the age of 47. His death sent shockwaves through New York society. The Waldorf Astoria draped itself in black. Flags flew at half-mast. The man who had done so much to create this monument to Gilded Age excess had died in what would become the most famous disaster in maritime history. Madeline Astor survived. She gave birth to their son, John Jacob Astor VI, a few months later. The child never knew his father. The Titanic disaster seemed to mark a turning point not just for the Astor family, but for the entire Gilded Age. Within 2 years of the sinking, World War I would begin. The old certainties, the belief in progress, in the superiority of wealth, in the unsinkable nature of Western civilization itself, would drown in the trenches of France just as surely as the Titanic drowned in the Atlantic. The original Waldorf Astoria continued to operate throughout the war years and into the Roaring '20s. It remained a center of New York's social life, hosting balls and banquets and all the usual extravagance. But something had changed. The hotel was aging. The building that had seemed so modern in the 1890s was starting to show its years. More importantly, the neighborhood was changing. Fifth Avenue in the 30s was no longer the fashionable residential district it had been when the Astor mansion stood there. Commerce was moving in. The social center of gravity was shifting uptown. And then came the proposal that would seal the original Waldorf Astoria's fate. In 1929, developers approached the hotel's owners with an offer. They wanted to buy the property, demolish the hotel, and build something new in its place. Something that would dwarf even the mighty Waldorf Astoria. They wanted to build the tallest building in the world. The Empire State Building. The owners agreed to the sale. The original Waldorf Astoria closed its doors on May 3, 1929. The wrecking balls arrived shortly after. The building that had embodied Gilded Age luxury, that had been born from family spite and grown into an American institution, was reduced to rubble. In its place, the Empire State Building rose. 454 feet of steel and stone, a new symbol of American ambition for a new era. But the Waldorf Astoria wasn't finished. Even as the original hotel came down, plans were underway for its resurrection. The new Waldorf Astoria opened on October 1, 1931. And it was, if anything, even more spectacular than its predecessor. Located on Park Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets, the new hotel occupied an entire city block. It was 47 stories tall, containing over 2,000 rooms, twice as many as the original. Its Art Deco design represented the cutting edge of architectural fashion. The chrome and marble interiors seemed to belong to a sleek, modern future rather than the ornate Gilded Age past. The opening was a national event. President Herbert Hoover delivered a congratulatory address via radio. Celebrities and dignitaries filled the ballrooms. The press declared it the greatest hotel in the world. But the timing could not have been worse. The stock market had crashed 2 years earlier. The Great Depression was deepening. Unemployment was skyrocketing. Millions of Americans were struggling to feed their families. And here was this monument to luxury, this palace of excess, opening its doors as if nothing had changed. The contrast was obscene. People were selling apples on street corners within blocks of where champagne corks popped at the Waldorf. Bread lines stretched through neighborhoods, while the hotel's restaurants served 10-course meals. The very existence of the new Waldorf Astoria seemed like a slap in the face to ordinary Americans suffering through the worst economic crisis in history. The hotel survived, of course. The wealthy always survive. But the new Waldorf Astoria represented something different than its predecessor. The Gilded Age was truly over now. The naive belief that wealth and progress marched hand in hand, that the rich deserved their riches and the poor deserved their poverty, had been shattered by the Depression. The new Waldorf Astoria was still luxurious, still exclusive, still a symbol of American success, but it was also somehow more self-conscious about it. The naked displays of excess that had characterized the original hotel were tempered now. The world had changed, and even the Waldorf had to acknowledge it. The new Waldorf Astoria developed its own dark stories over the decades that followed. The hotel became famous for its permanent residents, wealthy individuals who made the Waldorf their home. Among them were celebrities, recluses, and outright eccentrics. The isolation of hotel living, combined with unlimited money, created some unusual situations. One of the most famous residents was the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. You'll remember them. He was the British king who abdicated his throne to marry an American divorcee. They lived in the Waldorf's tower suites for years, holding court like exiled royalty, surrounded by controversy over the Duke's rumored Nazi sympathies. The hotel also played host to political intrigue. During the Cold War, the Waldorf was a favorite meeting place for diplomats, spies, and power brokers. The United Nations was headquartered nearby, and representatives from around the world stayed at the Waldorf. Intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain were rumored to have assets working inside the hotel, listening, watching, reporting. Secret meetings were held in private suites. Deals were struck that affected the fate of nations. The Waldorf became a stage where the great game of international politics was played out in elegant surroundings. And then there were the deaths. Any hotel that has operated for nearly a century will have seen its share of tragedy. People die in hotels, of natural causes, of accidents, of self-inflicted harm. The Waldorf Astoria was no exception. The most notorious case involved a wealthy widow who was found dead in her suite in the 1940s. The official ruling was suicide, but questions lingered. Her family disputed the findings. Rumors of foul play circulated. The case was never fully resolved. There were other deaths too, falls, overdoses, the quiet endings of lives that had outwardly seemed glamorous. The hotel's management became expert at handling such situations discreetly. Bodies were removed through service entrances. Rooms were quickly cleaned and relet. The show went on. The Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue remained the pinnacle of New York luxury for decades. Presidents stayed there. World leaders met there. It was the site of countless historic moments, from political conventions to celebrity weddings to business deals that shaped American industry. Every president from Herbert Hoover to Barack Obama stayed at the Waldorf while visiting New York. The hotel's presidential suite became unofficial neutral territory where American politicians met with foreign leaders. But even the mighty Waldorf eventually faced new challenges. In 2014, the hotel was purchased by a Chinese insurance company for nearly $2 billion. Concerns were immediately raised about security. The hotel's long history as a meeting place for American political and business leaders suddenly seemed problematic. Foreign ownership meant potential foreign surveillance. The U.S. government quietly began advising officials not to stay at the Waldorf when visiting New York. The State Department stopped booking rooms there. A hotel that had been synonymous with American power was now viewed with suspicion by that same power structure. In 2017, the hotel closed for a massive renovation project that was originally expected to take several years. As of my knowledge, it has yet to fully reopen. The building is being converted into luxury condominiums with a reduced number of hotel rooms. The era of the Grand Hotel, the era that the original Waldorf Astoria helped create, is drawing to a close. The way wealthy people travel has changed. Private jets and exclusive resorts have replaced the grand urban hotels as status symbols. The very idea of a massive hotel as a social center seems almost quaint now. So what are we to make of the Waldorf Astoria? What does its story tell us about America? The hotel was born from spite, from a family feud between people so wealthy that they could build massive buildings just to annoy each other. That's a peculiarly American origin story in its way. The idea that competition and resentment can create something magnificent. That ego and ambition, properly channeled, can produce results that benefit others, even if that was never the intention. But the hotel was also built on exploitation. The luxury that guests enjoyed was made possible by workers who labored in brutal conditions for poverty wages. The champagne and silk and marble depended on invisible armies of the poor. That, too, is an American story, the dark side of the success narrative, the hidden cost of every gleaming achievement. The Waldorf Astoria witnessed American history from the Gilded Age through 2 world wars, through Depression and boom times, through the Cold War and into the 21st century. Its guests included presidents and princes, criminals and spies, celebrities and nobodies. Its walls contained secrets that will never be told. And it killed its own builder. John Jacob Astor IV, who constructed half of the original hotel just to one-up his cousin, died in the most famous disaster of the age. There's something almost too perfect about that, the hubris of the Gilded Age sinking in icy water, the unsinkable idea going down with the unsinkable ship. The Waldorf Astoria represents everything fascinating and terrible about American wealth. The ambition and the arrogance, the achievement and the exploitation, the glitter and the darkness. When you walk past the building on Park Avenue today, quiet now, undergoing its transformation, you're walking past a monument to all of that. Every brick holds stories of excess and elegance, scandal and secrecy, triumph and tragedy. The Gilded Age is over, but its legacy lives on in places like the Waldorf, in the dreams of luxury that still captivate us, in the inequalities that still divide us, in the dark truth beneath every golden surface. That's the story of America's largest Gilded Age hotel. Beautiful, troubled, unforgettable. If you made it this far, you're clearly as fascinated by these dark histories as I am. Hit that subscribe button if you want more content like this, and drop a comment below what dark history should we explore next. Until then, stay curious, stay questioning, and never stop looking beneath the surface.